Yeah, and so which part are you in?
I'm in the policy shop.
Okay, so did you?
I did a similar kind of thing. Yeah, they lock you in a room. They don't let you out very often. Well, it's not.
You wrote stuff down?
Yeah, that's the only way I can.
I should have prepped. I definitely did. I read the questions like, I think I could figure something out. I gotta grow up and get a little better. I gotta get my life together.
It's gonna be a conversation.
No.
Oh, you gotta show us.
You got me trained. I be taking pictures everywhere I go.
Okay.
You so life not damn you winner. Taking all that melanin.
I don't think they ever won. Like, I clear every appearance. No, I don't know if that's true. Appreciate it.
Y'all are crazy.
Oh, my bad.
Sorry.
Actually, you gotta get it together.
So, since the start of the administration, but I was career side over at different housing agencies. Yeah, sure.
You have the questions on this?
I have no idea. It's missing some vowels, that's for sure.
You wrote it all up.
Not the visual. I mean,
Exactly.
Oh, yeah, I just remember. Sorry.
No, it's all good. I wish I knew the answer.
I've been trying really hard for this.
But yeah, so I've done the
When I post on Instagram,
I
the
don't.
images,
I don't.
I try. If it's
I
too
just
many
never
pictures,
have.
I don't. It's so lost.
Government is its own special.
If it's my nieces too, it's over. I can't do it. How do I describe it? I love them. Here, little people. These are, yeah, and then these are her responses.
Can I quickly peruse just the questions one more
I
time?
actually have.
Come on.
No, I don't think they can hear us. Start.
Can I actually do something?
Oh, look, she's got the
I
questions.
had very similar experience.
Everyone ready to start?
Oh, I'm ready anytime. Yeah, yeah.
Here, I want to swap it up because these are the questions. Those are her responses. So she.
I just want to,
Thank you. Start? Yeah.
You guys can do better. We can build back better if it wasn't.
yeah, that's why I said these mics are hot, aren't they?
Oh. Good morning, everyone. Woo! Sorry. If you're not awake, hopefully that woke you up. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Leading Change session to live, move, and have fun in the world. This panel takes a closer look at the social determinant of health, social and community context, and the importance of ensuring that people with disabilities receive supports in all places where they live, work, learn, and play. Throughout the discussion, government and network leaders from across different sectors will address the vital role of social supports for people with disabilities and offer tangible recommendations for more civic and community participation. Thank you for choosing to be here this morning. I am Sally Gould-Taylor, and I'm the Executive Director of Pennsylvania's AUCD at Temple University. I'm a white woman in my early 40s with brown hair and a round face, and I'm wearing a black shirt and pants. I would like to start this session with a brief land acknowledgement. We come together today from around the country and around the globe and I acknowledge that we are together today in unceded territory of the Nacotchtanks land. This morning's Leading Change sessions are generously sponsored by Centene, Pharma, Pfizer, Microsoft, and the School of Health Professions at the University of Alabama. Thank you, gold sponsors. If you haven't already, please take the time to visit our sponsors and exhibitors in the exhibiting area. I'm now going to turn to our panelists. Would each of you please introduce yourself with a visual description and share your background and current roles? Ethan, would you like to start?
Sure, happy to, and thanks for having me today. I'm Ethan Handelman. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Multifamily Housing at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. You've often heard us called HUD, which is fine. I'm a cis white guy, late 40s, salt and pepper beard, forehead that gets bigger every year, ponytail that doesn't, but I'm enjoying it while I got it, in a, regulation gray suit. I'm here, I think, because I work on our multifamily housing, particularly the rental housing programs, which provide folks who need it, not all of the folks who need it, but some of the folks who need it, help paying the rent, help creating new homes in places, hopefully, that have more opportunity, and providing ongoing supports for those homes. HUD's work is inherently focused on equity in a variety of ways, and we have some specialized programs that I'll talk about later that focus on persons with disabilities, as well as older adults who need sometimes similar configurations of living. Really, I'm here because housing's at the root of so much of what this panel is about, preparing people and platforming them to live where they want to live and live how they want to live. And if you don't have stable housing that's accessible to you and to the folks who want to live with you and visit you, it's going to be really challenging. So that's why I'm here, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Ethan. Kelly?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Glad to see you all here. My name is Kelly Buckland. I am the Disability Policy Advisor in the Office of the Secretary at the U.S. Department of Transportation. I'm a old white guy who wears a cowboy hat and uses a wheelchair for mobility. I have been doing disability rights work for just about ever. I grew up on a cattle ranch and a potato farm in Idaho, hence the hat. Cowboy never quite left me. And I got a spinal cord injury when I was 16. So it was 1970. It was actually July 26, 1970, 20 years before the ADA. I was a social worker with the Department of Health and Welfare in Idaho for 10 years, and then went into disability rights. Kind of did that a lot on the side, actually, but then I ran a Center for Independent Living in Boise, Idaho for 6 years. Then I ran the State Independent Living Council in Idaho for 15 years. Then I moved to DC. I ran the National Council on Independent Living here for 12. I retired about 2 years ago, and I think I was retired for about 3 months. And then the president assigned me to this position, and have just really been digging it. I mean, it's really a cool place to be right now. We got like so much money, we can't shove it out the door quick enough. And we really are building America and over again, and hopefully this time we're gonna make it accessible when we do it. So that's what I'm working on to do that.
Thanks, Kelly. Ashley?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Abona-Salmon. I'm a Black queer woman in her early 30s. I'm wearing a green sweater, and I have dark locks, and I'm also wearing glasses. I'm the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Research Associate at the Center for Leadership and Disability at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been in this role since January, and I'm just here to highlight some of the exciting work that we've been doing in partnership with AUCD on their equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives. So I'm happy to be here with you all today and excited to generate a good discussion. Thank you.
That was mad efficient. I don't got it together at all. Good morning, everyone. My name is JD Flores. I am wearing a green blazer and a white shirt that says "You gotta exist to be erased." And it's my green season, so green is is in my eye. I'm from Rochester, New York. I'm of Puerto Rican descent. I have black hair in a ponytail, and I'm wearing clear glasses. I don't have a fancy job title at all. I just really don't say no to anything. So I do a little bit of everything in terms of advocacy in my state. Well, also in other places. Y'all all see me everywhere. I don't say no, but I think that the biggest appeal to me is that I don't shut up, and so I think that that's why people invite me into the room. So I would say that I have cerebral palsy. I use a chair to get around. Me and Clyde, we take on the world together. And so what I do is really talk about my lived experience and how to make this a better place. That's pretty much it.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeremy Bazell. I am a white male with brown spiky hair, wearing some thick-rimmed glasses, white, and I use the pronouns he, him. So I have worked for the federal government for about 20 plus years. Anyone who thinks to themselves, wow, that name sounds vaguely familiar, 10 years of that was at the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services. So I worked on a lot of programs that worked with university centers. And for many years, I was the person who oversaw the implementation of the Assistive Technology Act, which I know many of the AUCD members are the heads of. But my current role is as the person who, at the national level, helps national parks be more accessible to people with disabilities. So I look forward to talking with you about how access to the outdoors and recreation is important to health and well-being.
Great. Thank you all for being here and taking time to introduce yourselves. We want to start with our first kind of grounding question, which is really asking you guys to highlight a project that addresses health and equity from a social or cultural perspective, something you're working on now or have been working on recently. Ethan, do you want to start?
Sure, happy to. I'll start with a core program of HUD that has gotten some new funding over the last few years. There was a period where our Section 811 program, the old title is Housing for Persons with Disabilities, was pretty inactive. There was not a lot of funds, but over the last few years, Congress has put some more money back into it. It's a tool for us to create new homes with rental assistance that are accessible and meet the needs of persons with disabilities, like the old legislative title says. Over the years, we've gotten somewhat better at figuring out how to do that. There are a lot of older Section 811 properties that are group homes, not terribly well integrated into the community with pretty limited services. We have gotten much better at figuring out how to integrate this sort of supportive housing into larger, what sometimes folks call mainstream rental developments. Just the rental housing that you will see in your community can have a component of it that is supported through the 811 program. Similarly, our Section 202 program, and yes, we speak housing, so it's all numbers and acronyms, and I'll do my best to translate. But that's housing, supportive housing for the elderly, again, an old title. It includes funds that have both capital and rental assistance, just like the 811 program. So we help to build the housing, and we help to pay the rent over time. And you need both of those to make anything work. That's why they're pretty important. It's still smaller scale in terms of housing programs, but it's an essential element of what we do. One of the things that's exciting right now is as we're kind of breathing new life into these programs and having more of an impact with them, we're also helping to make them connect better with the housing that serves the community more generally. So trying to make it more energy efficient, trying to make it higher quality, trying to make it last longer, trying to locate it more in areas of opportunity, which is sort of a term of art, but the idea is not shoving it off to the side where no one else wants to live, but really trying to make it in places that have access to jobs and transportation and libraries and all the stuff that attracts people to want to live in a place. So part of what's exciting at HUD is that we're able to connect opportunity to housing and connect people to those opportunities. It's an ongoing challenge that we do not have the funding to serve all of the need that is out there. If you just think in the broadest sense, about 25% of the people who are eligible for housing help actually get it. So it's not an entitlement. It's not like Social Security or Medicare, right? You can't just say, oh, I'm eligible, let me go get it. No, you're on a waiting list. And that's an ongoing challenge and one we're trying to deal with. The other challenge that the Office of Multifamily, the part of HUD that I run, works on is trying to make sure that the new housing that's getting built, because we provide a lot of financing for just mainstream housing, sometimes without assistance, sometimes with, that it contains homes that are accessible as a baseline. It's easier to do with new construction. It's harder to do when you're fixing up older properties, but there's a legal obligation for a certain level of fix-up rehab that requires it as well. And that's one of the frankly most powerful tools we have, is to make sure that housing, as we're creating it and operating it and renovating it, has opportunities for everyone. So in terms of what I'm excited about, that's a big part of it. It is the day-to-day housing work. It can get a little weedy and a little, we can talk endlessly about parking requirements. You have no idea. And they're really important in terms of figuring out what you can build and where, but they're also stultifying at times. But yeah, that's what gets me excited.
Great.
Yeah, well, surprise, I'm going to talk about transportation. It's really hard to do anything, live, work, play, visit friends, any of that stuff if you can't get there. So transportation is incredibly important, and the whole spectrum of transportation is really important. Rural transportation to flying. So anyone who's flown lately knows how awful that is right now and how unsafe it is. So at the department, we're working on changing how people fly. So right now, we're going to be issuing a final rule on requiring airlines to have accessible restrooms on single-aisle aircraft. We are going to be issuing a rule probably in about another year. That's going to require them to do training on the people who transfer you. Breaking your wheelchair is going to be a per se violation of the Air Carrier Access Act, and harming you when they're doing that, it's also going to be a violation. Believe it or not, it's not explicit right now in the rules and regulations that if they harm you, it's actually a violation. So we're going to make that explicit as well. We're going to start reinforcing this stuff with fines, and we are going to map out a way where people can board an aircraft and fly in their own wheelchairs. You will not have to be transferred anymore. It's not going to happen tomorrow, and people aren't going to just be able to wheel on an airplane like right away, or any aircraft for that matter, because smaller aircraft are going to be harder to achieve this. But that is where we're headed, and we're going to make it happen. So that will be a game changer. It will completely change the way people fly. And it will be so much safer. I mean, people are actually being sent to the hospital just trying to get on an airplane. In fact, some people are dying because they're trying to get on an airplane. So we're going to change that. We have 4 areas that we're going to be working on. So the second one is basically, we call it the rights of way, but there's, believe it or not, 32 years later, we do not have a public rights of way accessibility guidelines. We have accessibility guidelines for a lot of stuff under the ADA, but not public rights of way. So sidewalks, crosswalks, all that stuff, there's no accessibility guidelines. The Department of Transportation, the Department of Justice, and the Access Board have been working really hard on this, and we should have a rule out like in January, if not before. So just a couple more months and we should have a rule out with accessibility guidelines on public rights of way. That includes rail and other things. Like I think some of you probably know, in the infrastructure bill, there's money in there for the All Stations Accessibility Program. That's a piece of it, but really, like right now, as I said in my introduction, which I'm really not lying. I mean, we are shoving money out the door as fast as we can possibly humanly make it happen. Because we have, like, between the Infrastructure Jobs Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and then some of the others that were COVID related, like we have over $1 trillion that we're putting out. So that includes rebuilding airports, it includes rail stations, and it's going to include basically replacing every Amtrak train. So the regional trains are going to be first. We've been looking at cars, and they're being procured like right soon, and should be on the rails in about 3 more years. The long haul trains that go across the country, it's going to take a little longer, so it's probably going to be more like 5 to 10 years before those things start to hit the rails. But they're going to be incredibly accessible. The restrooms are going to be great. Getting on the train is going to be great. Every train's going to have, every car, as a matter of fact, is going to have 2 lifts, so one on each side. So whichever direction the train's going, you're going to be able to get on and off with a lift. Then with all of that money going out, we're creating like tons of jobs. So we think that people with disabilities ought to have their fair share of those jobs. So we're going to try, as you know, federal contractors and their subcontractors are required under 503 to try to hire 7% people with disabilities. So we're going to try to start enforcing that in all the contracts that we put out for for contractors, federal contractors and subcontractors, and require the states to do that as well. So that should generate like a bunch of jobs. And then the last area is automated and electric vehicles. Like we're really, I think the disability community anyway is very concerned that we're going to get left behind when it comes to electric cars and automated vehicles. So the department's been working hard on that. We just had a inclusive design challenge that we gave away $5 million for people to come up with designs and ways that people can like board and lock in and wayfind themselves into automated vehicles. So, and that's on our website. So if you want to see who the winners are, it's up on our website. But so anyway, I mean, that's more than one, but it's hard to just talk about one when we're doing so much. So that's kind of, all of that stuff hopefully is interconnected too, so that people can get smoothly and seamlessly where they need to be, and that it's accessible and affordable.
Yeah, so I guess I'll pivot to the pandemic, right? So there's a project called the National COVID-19 Resiliency Network, or NCERN, that AUCD is in partnership with Morehouse School of Medicine. So AUCD was asked to join the project to help inform the disability perspective, and I was contracted with AUCD in that first year, you know, to help with some cool stuff like recruitment, cultural responsiveness, and some aspects of project management. However, you know, there was an extensive back and forth about disability itself, you know, and, you know, particularly as like disability as its own minoritized group who experience oppression. And so one of my responsibilities was to narrow down our target audience to ensure that racial ethnic minority groups with IDDD were represented in the study. So this was a grand opportunity that, you know, I found to highlight the compounded form of oppression experienced by multiply marginalized groups. So people of color who also experience disability. And this is outlined by Dr. Anjali J. Forber-Pratt in her 2018 article, Disability Identity and Allyship in Rehabilitation. Rehabilitation Psychology, Sit, Stand, Sign, and Show Up. And this is a quote that I have parroted over and over again, and it's from the paper, and it reads, individuals who experience racism, homophobia, transphobia, religious persecution, or any combination thereof, in addition to ableism, experience a compounded form of oppression. And that is often not considered in designing tools, practices, and research agendas. So this experience, as outlined by Dr. Anjali Forber-Pratt, this compounded form of oppression is intersectionality. So as a result, we were able to engage in this reciprocal exchange of information and resource sharing, specifically around plain language, accessibility, you know, cultural responsiveness, and inclusive research practices. And, you know, something that we were constantly talking about in our team meetings when I was a part of this team in the first year was, we have to call them in, don't call them out. And it's just a good way to, stretch folks who might not know too much about disability and engage in a reciprocal exchange of information so that you can collaborate with folks, strengthen your partnerships, and, do some great work together. So I think that's a great project to really highlight some of the social and cultural perspectives of health equity.
Thanks, Ashley.
No pressure. I do not do all the great things Ashley does. I do a lot of work through storytelling, and I do a lot of work through telling my own personal story. My parents migrated here when I was a kid, specifically for me. I'm very much so like the movie Encanto, except I have way more cousins. So I am the AUCD podcast host. And so simple, small plug there. So our episodes are dropping every other week. And I interview a couple of folks throughout the network, really talking about the work that they're doing within diversity, inclusion, and equity. I can't tell you that the conversations always make sense because I don't know what I'm doing. I just be, we're making it up as we go together. We're growing in that space together. But I also have done some video focus groups, specifically talking to doctors. I don't understand who guys are built. I don't understand the med school process. It never makes sense to me. Every time I talk to y'all, like y'all in a different place. But I think it happens. It comes together. But what I get to do is share my personal lived experience. And so that's exactly what we did in this healthcare video, to talk about my experience as someone who is receiving healthcare services and how inequitable it has been, and how ableist it has been, how racist it has been, and how complicated it is to create a functional relationship with a healthcare provider. And so I think I sound pretty smart in the video, so if you get a second to watch it, I'm not sure where they have been released, but they are released out to the world. And then I also have written a couple different blog posts, specifically talking about womanhood, and what it's like to be a woman with a disability, and also like emerging into this womanhoodness, because I'm just making it up. And so those have been some of the things that I would like to highlight.
So working in the parks and recreation space, I often talk about, somebody I'm sure will Google this and tell me that I'm incorrect, but I have been told that during World War II, when England was being bombed from the air, Winston Churchill made sure that there was still funding to keep the theaters in London open. And people were like, well, why would you do that? And their answer was, if we don't still have the arts, what are we fighting for? And so that is the perspective I try to take on, the fact that people with disabilities are going to have housing needs and transportation needs and employment needs and healthcare needs. And if we had a system where all of those needs were met, we still wouldn't be meeting people's needs to be outdoors. It's the live, work, play part, right? We actually have been responding to the executive orders by the Biden administration about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, with a specific focus on access to recreation. Importantly, looking at, can you get to the places where you can recreate, number one, and then number two, once you get there, are there things for you to do? Because I think a lot of people, when they hear about national parks, go, right, Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, Yosemite, these big parks in these isolated areas that I'm gonna fly to and have a tour company and stay at a hotel, when a lot of our 400 plus national parks are actually people's local parks. Golden Gate National Recreation Area in San Francisco is national park. Gateway National Recreation Area in New Jersey, right near New York City, that's a national park. Most of what you will wander through here in Washington, D.C. is actually national park property. So for many people with disabilities, our national parks are there local parks? Which means that if we do not provide access to them, they also don't have access to local resources. So we're not, I mean, we certainly put a focus on the Yellowstones and the Yosemites, but those are also the big draws. Those are also the things that everyone thinks about when they think about national parks. And maybe we need to shift our focus to, well, what is that local resource that people may not have access to, that they're not doing once in a lifetime, but that they're choosing to do once a week, because that's how they are connecting with nature, connecting with friends, exercising, just getting fresh air during COVID where you don't have to wear a mask because you can be farther away from people and a little more isolated. So I would say that is right now a lens through which we are looking at health and equity and our role in that space.
Thank you. For me, hearing all of your different perspectives and the different fields and lens in which you're addressing this work really highlights the kind of the theme of the conference, right? We're thinking about the whole person, and if, transportation needs are taken care of, but employment needs aren't, or needs aren't, then it's really not equitable and promoting the ability to choose a healthy lifestyle the way that you want it to look like for the whole person. So I think it's so great that we have people from all these different perspectives on the panel today. So I wanted to ask, and I promise that we won't end on negatives, but I wanted to ask you guys to think about, again, from this social determinant of health, social and community context, if you can talk about the biggest challenges facing your work today. And I promise that we'll talk about positives after. If you want to talk about the biggest challenges in your work or the people you're supporting or those types of things. Ethan, do you want to start?
Sure. And housing has its share of challenges, no question. Let me highlight two, and they're interrelated. One is we don't have enough housing in the places that people want to live. If we have enough just total boxes for people to live in. You look at the census, the numbers of boxes that we have and people roughly work out. But a bunch of them are old and not in great shape, and a bunch of them are in places where there aren't a bunch of jobs and things that attract people to live there. In a lot of places, there is a housing shortage. And there's all sorts of reasons for that, but one of the biggest reasons is, as communities, we put up a lot of barriers. We make it hard to create new homes. Some of that is at a very local level. I don't want an apartment building right next to my neighborhood. I don't want the traffic. It'll have an impact on schools, right? There's a long list of reasons people come up with why they don't want it. Some of those reasons are just outright, I don't want to live next to the people that are going to live in those apartments. And, that is one of the most challenging things to overcome. And it's also one of the least articulated and least talked about reasons. It's usually put behind the character of the neighborhood or cutting down trees or schools or traffic or something else. So that's a big challenge. And it translates into the cost of housing overall. Because it's harder to create housing, we don't have enough, so rents are high, way higher than they ought to be. The cost of buying a home is way higher than it ought to be, and it puts it out of reach of folks who have less money. So that's a big challenge. When I think about HUD's work and where we can fit in, some of it is on trying to make change and create more opportunities to create housing where it's needed and desired. It's also in helping to fund housing, helping to provide resources like I talked about earlier to build it and to run it over time. So capital side and rental assistance side. There we have resource challenges as well. Part of it is housing is really expensive for some of the reasons I described. So when we have to subsidize to pay for it, that gets harder too. But it's also, we're just not yet funded at the levels to meet all of the need. I think I mentioned earlier, about 25% of the people who are eligible for housing help actually get it. And surprisingly, that has not penetrated the public consciousness very much. If you think about how much airtime we have put into housing versus other issues, but then think about how much we spend on housing. So for most households, housing is the single biggest expense they have, right? We say it's affordable if it's 30% of your income. For a lot of folks, especially with lesser means, it's 40, 50% or more of their household budget. Healthcare is less. It's really important, but it's significantly less than that 30% threshold. How many news stories have you heard about healthcare versus news stories you've heard about housing? Even the last couple of years where housing's really gotten into the news, finally. I've been in this field more than 20 years. I've never seen it like it is now in terms of public attention. We're still not thinking about it as the core pocketbook, daily life issue that it is for so many people in this country. And until we change the pieces that make it hard, right? Those land use questions, the opposition to new development, all of the challenges that we create as a society, the cost of trying to overcome it will keep getting higher. So there's that inherent tension. There are certainly other challenges. There's lots of them, and they intersect with it. But at its base, if we're going to have room for everyone to live in ways they want to live, we need to get over the idea that, only the really good housing is for people who can really afford it. And so you struggle all your life to achieve enough income to pay for better housing. It would be great if most of the places that people could live were accessible, nice, safe, affordable. That we should strive for that, which means investing in a lot of places and investing in a lot of people to live in them. So I will stop there in terms of challenges.
Great.
So I think for me, it's similar to Ethan. There's a lot of systemic racism built into transportation. A lot of the money goes to the more wealthy and influential neighborhoods versus poor neighborhoods. So over time, that's really had an impact. So we're trying to be very intentional about because we have so much money right now, trying to be very intentional about directing that money to poor neighborhoods and racially diverse neighborhoods too, versus where it's been going. So the other thing that we know is that the rate of disability is higher in poor and ethnically oppressed neighborhoods, and so that really is where we're trying to direct the money. So as was mentioned before, the president's executive order on equity really has been something we've been focused on. So as we're going through all of these proposals and funding them, the goal really is to direct 40% of this money into poor neighborhoods and try to address some of the infrastructure needs that have not been met for like a century or maybe more. So I think the challenge is very much the same as what Ethan was talking about. Oh, and going against the airlines, that's another challenge.
I would say, being in a big national network, I picked up a couple phrases that really help, kind of frame some of the challenges. So herding cats, right? So there's so many you said's, and everybody's doing great work, but everybody's doing it so differently. So when you're really trying to come to a consensus, or even how we're even trying to put definitions on equity, diversity, and inclusion, we're still working on it. It's been many years in the making, right? Another term or phrase is building the plane as we fly it. So that's something that we constantly say. So things are fluid, often changing. Adapting and reacclimating is commonplace in the network, and your teams change, projects change, and then, lastly, anticipating shifting political administrations, right, and priorities. So this is at the federal level, so you are here in DC now. The state level, I'm in Georgia, politics there are interesting. The local level, and it's just new policies that could affect this work, this health equity, diversity, equity, inclusion work, for better or for worse, So there's a little anxiety when you think about how things might change if, our administration drastically changes or shifts priorities. Thinking about how we can create sustainable change as quickly as possible with causing as little harm as possible is challenging, right? So it goes back to herding cats and building the plane as we fly it. So, thanks.
This is a hard question because I don't want to be too real and get fired. This list is also very endless in my humble opinion. I would say one of the biggest barriers is attitudinal beliefs and lack of respect. I'm not super degreed. I have a bachelor's in sociology, and what that means, I don't know, because my mama doesn't understand it, so it's not even real to her. And I'm getting my master's in human development, and she still laughs and says, "Aren't you tired of people yet?" And I was like, "Ma, not yet. There's still more work to do." So for me, it really is, the list is endless. So ableism is huge. So none of this do I get to leave at the door, right? So I don't get to leave any of the things that I do at work. I go home and I still have to do this because ableism is still very much so real in every space that I enter. It's like a low hum in my life that never turns off. And and then racism is also obviously that as well, colorism as well. It just very much so varies in the space that I'm in. And so I would say that my biggest barriers are really the people that I work with, right? As actively working to change something that has been true to them for so long. And this is not to say that I don't work with amazing people, because I do, but I'm only one of one. Right? And how many disabled people really get the opportunities that I get? Not many. And it's not that I'm super spectacular, I think that, but there are other people who are very much so great and who can have the same opportunities as I do. They just don't have the same kind of support system that I have. I was blessed to have a mom who was ready to migrate and do whatever she needed to do, and a dad who was like, "What do you need in terms of money?" My dad very much so will fund a life. And so I think for me, the biggest barriers are those folks who stand in the way and don't want to acknowledge that they are standing in the way, don't want to acknowledge that it's time for them to move out, that it's time for a new guard, that it's time for us to do things differently. Those folks who are afraid to challenge the systems in which they exist within because they're afraid of what that might mean for them. So they're always willing to let me pay the price, but they are not willing to pay the price themselves. And so that is the problem. I can't keep paying the price because I'm not going to get as far as I need to. It's really expensive to live the life that I live, and I take a risk every time when I take it. But I always firmly believe that I'm going to be good. So like I said, the list could be endless, but I'm still going to make it regardless because I am who I am. And so I think that when we think of barriers, thank you. When we think of barriers, I just think that that's a very intimate, personal thing. It's not about the grand scheme of things. It's about what you are doing. And if you are ever a barrier, then you need to be like, all right, cool, let me check me and let me move. I have a lot of me moments every day where I'm like, I gotta check me. Is it me? Am I the drama? Do I have to move along? And then if it is me, then I'll move along. And if it isn't, then I'm obviously cussing you out to myself. But I'm hoping that I reach enough people where I have enough support to, help me build that plane as I move along.
Can I pass after that?
Right.
So I don't have the same problem that Kelly has. We don't have more money than we know what to do with, and bless you for being in that position. Although I know what it's like to be in that position, it's almost as hard as not having enough money. But let's just say we did have as much money as we needed in the National Park Service, because that's the obvious. Everyone's going to say oh, well, money is our barrier. So one of the things people have to understand about how the Park Service works is we have 400 plus units. We have a very, very decentralized system, meaning There is no one who is telling all 400 plus of those parks what to do and how to do it. There is no one saying, I do not have the ability to tell a park, hey, that's a violation of Section 504 or the ABA, thou shalt fix it. That's not how it works. I do not have the money to say, hey, would you like to fix that? I've got some money for you. So even if we had all the money in the world, each park is its own separate operating entity. Now, as folks who are in a network of university centers, would you be surprised to hear that each one feels that it is a unique special flower with its own special challenges and its own culture and its own things it has to do in its own way because it lives in its own context? So we are facing that challenge, right? So you can't overcome that necessarily with money. And then what I would say is that we have, even if we had all the money in the world, we have inherent barriers built into what we are as an organization and our mission. Our mission is to preserve natural and cultural resources, which means that there will inevitably be inherent conflicts with accessibility, because there will be cases in which you cannot preserve the cultural and historic and natural integrity of something while also making it accessible. And that is, the core of a lot of what I do in my work, right? Because this 400 parks, all of which operate independently with their own funding and with their own, staffs, et cetera, they hire people because they understand history or archaeology or bears or whatever it is that they happen to understand. That's what they're there to do. They are there to manage that resource. These are not people who understand disability. These are not people who understand accessibility. That's not their job. Their job is to make this resource available to the public. My job is to help them understand we're preserving this for everyone, right? And in order to make this available to everyone, we need to do A, B, C, D, E, and F, right? Our primary function is providing technical assistance, providing training, so that I would say, I would consider myself a success at my job if people who were out in that environment merely said to themselves, I should probably think about how this is going to be accessible to people with disabilities, question one. And then if they said, who should I call to find out more information about how to do that? And they knew to call us, I would say I'm a success. I'd be like, great, because that's the best I can expect. I can't expect them to be subject matters in accessibility. At this point, I can expect them to say, I have to figure out how to make this accessible, and I have to talk to an expert in order to achieve that.
Thanks. So listening to what JD had to say is making me think about kind of the notions that are going through all of our heads all day. And as an anthropologist, I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't going to ask you guys to be a little self-reflective, right? Because here at this conference, we're both talking about the work that we do in this large field of disability, but we're also thinking about our role as professionals that are growing in this field, right? And how can we make sure that our work both supports us and our growth, but also really prioritizes and privileges people with disabilities first and foremost. So I'm wondering if you guys would be willing to share some questions, and these are questions I have a lot when I go to these conferences. I hear experts who are explaining, talking about great research and projects, but I really want to know, how were you able to grow and do your work in this space, and also think about who you are and how you fit within that? So I'm wondering if you'd be willing to talk about or answer the questions about what or who has helped you to get where you are, and what advice you might have for others who want to do work in similar spaces or through similar lenses as you guys have been discussing this morning. Sorry, I don't know if this is an unfair question.
No, it's a great question.
Go ahead.
Can I go?
Absolutely.
Okay. And part of the reason I think it's a great question is because I work in this field that most people don't realize is a field. Like affordable housing, when you're in high school, you can sort of see how to become a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or work in the trades. Like there's a path, right? You know which sort of training you need and there's a job. Maybe you had an uncle who did real estate, maybe. As to those informational interviews, those generally younger folks who are figuring out their career path, not always younger, but often, and say, yeah, this is housing, because we need more smart people doing housing work. So I'm hoping that some fraction of the folks sitting here think, oh, wow, housing is really important. I'd like to do some of that. And I encourage you to come talk to me. Because we are regularly posting jobs at HUD. There are all sorts of employment opportunities within housing more broadly. So whether you're building or lending or operating or investing in housing or working to sell it or working to help other people live in it or counseling folks to get their budget together so they can become homeowners or counseling folks to help figure out their rental situation or doing legal aid. Like there's a long list of housing related fields and jobs. But yeah, look for those opportunities. Don't feel like you have to be on a prescribed path, and ask for help figuring it out.
Thanks.
So, being an old guy and having got my disability 20 years before the ADA, there's like a lot of stuff that has helped me do what I do. So lots of people and lots of just sort of like fate. But really how I got into disability rights was, I was a social worker, and I got into social work because I had grew up on a farm where you did labor, like hard labor, physical stuff. And when I got injured and went into the rehab hospital, I was made really aware of there's this, you can get paid to help other people. I was like, wow, you can actually make a living helping other people. So that's what really drew me into it. And then, so that's why I got the social work degree. But there was a VISTA volunteer in Burley, Idaho in 1981 that got me into disability rights. They were trying to organize mothers on welfare and also like disability rights stuff. And so that's sort of how I got involved. And we had a small group of people that wanted to work on access to voting. Interestingly enough, right after the elections, we're talking about this again. That was in 1985. We passed, some of you may know, in 1984, the handicapped and elderly voting bill passed back then. And it was starting to go into effect in 1985 in the States. So we were trying to make sure that it went into effect in Idaho. And so we're doing work with the legislature. And I actually got hooked up with the DD Council at that point. And so the VISTA volunteers that worked with me really mentored me into knowing how to do some community organizing. And then the director of the DD Council and all the members of the DD Council really also helped me by mentoring me a lot and teaching me how the legislative process worked and that whole thing. And so I'm a really big believer in community and local organizing. We work on the federal level here, but one of the things that I was, when I say that we've got all this money, and we do, it is like a blessing and a curse, right? I mean, like, you're trying to get it out as fast as possible because everybody's expecting you to do that. But the error in too much speed is you do it wrong, right? So we're really trying to make sure that we're doing it right, we're making stuff accessible, but yet getting the money out quickly. Those are two competing things, and so sometimes it's really hard to make sure it's getting done right. So really the thing that can make that work better is people who are in local communities on the ground where the rubber meets the road, to use another transportation acronym, really have to, like, we need you guys out there to be paying attention to the money that is coming into your state and your local communities, and that it's gonna be spent right, and that it's being done right. There's a requirement that these projects, like the states and the local areas that get funded, do involve the community in what they're doing. So really, I really would implore and encourage you to like get involved on the local level, make sure this stuff is getting done right, and just practice some good old local community organizing skills, and that will ensure that this stuff gets done right. And that, so I think that's, and you'll mentor other people into it as well, so, or be mentored into it. So that, I think that's where people have the closest relationships and learn the most and get supported the most, so.
Thank you.
So I've been with the AUCD, the Center for Leadership and Disability, since 2015. And you know, mentorship is exactly, you know, what I'm here to talk about as it pertains to who and what has helped me. So all the great people here at the Center for Leadership and Disability have really been a great support for me. Since 2015, I came in as a student worker or GRA. 2018, I finally came on full-time as a research coordinator. And you know, 2020, we had a hell of a year, right? So George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, so much happened. And you know, through the support of the leadership at CLD, we were able to engage in really extensive conversations, uncomfortable conversations, right? But I think we're better for it. And so, you know, a big thanks to the current and past leadership at the Center for Leadership and Disability, namely Drs. Emily Graybill and Daniel Crimmins, particularly for their roles on the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Action Plan for the AUCD network. And if you haven't heard about it yet, I'm surprised. Also, Dr. Brian Barger, who's been my advisor, my supervisor, and you know, particularly for his scholarly contributions to measurement and inequities in autism diagnoses. And you know, just to relate this all back to some of the scholarship that I have leaned on, you know, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw and her scholarly contributions to intersectionality as a Black woman. I mentioned Dr. Anjali J. Forber-Pratt and her scholarly contributions to intersectionality from the perspective of a woman of color with a disability, so that compounded form of oppression. And it really gives you a lens to think about this stuff through. Sometimes, you know, intersectionality doesn't quite hit it. You know, compounded form of oppression is a bit more visceral. You know, you can feel it. I was in a talk at the National Training Directors Council, and she mentioned intersectionality as literally standing in the intersection and two cars hitting you at the same time, right? So if racism and ableism are hitting you at the same time, you imagine, like, that's a more visceral explanation of intersectionality, in my opinion. And all the great folks at AUCD, so particularly Dawn Rudolph, she's been really a champion for me in this work. And you know, as it relates to equity, diversity, inclusion, and you know, I would tell folks just, you know, keep leading where they are. You know, reach out to your leadership for opportunities. Luckily for me, I was like, hey, can I pursue some contract roles? You know, I'm interested in some other work, and they wrote letters of support for me, and you know, I've been able to really thrive in this space over the past couple of years. So, you know, don't be afraid to speak out, be heard, you know, make connections. You never know who might be listening, who might have similar viewpoints or perspectives. And I will say a lot of this work is about relationships. You know, you talk about building coalitions, it's building relationships. And I mean, it's about relationship and money, right? So we gotta stay funded. You gotta pursue things that, you know, advance you in life too, so you know, can't disregard that. But you know, relationships are really what I think is most important about, you know, building coalitions for sustainable change. So, you know, I'm interested in expanding this work to more policy spaces, really bridging the gap between quantitative methodologies, qualitative methodologies, and policy analysis. And I really feel like we could crack open, you know, this conversation by really having a critical lens on how we shape the world through policy. So I'm excited for the future, and I'm excited to continue to build relationships and welcome mentors along the way. So, thanks.
I feel like you have all the words all the time, Ashley. I lead with love, and this is not necessarily like the best way to live life, because once I don't love you, it's over. Like, there's no way for you to cross back. That's just, that door is closed, and I respectfully will have to just play pretend like I like you. But I lead with love, and I try to bring in life into every room that I enter. Like, that is just who I am at my core, but I'm also very much so driven by my moral compass. If you violate my moral compass in any way, then I cannot play in your sandbox. It just is not what works for me. And so in this work, what I have learned is that I cannot waver. I mean, that's just who I am as a person too. Like, I was born this way. Like, my mom would tell you, like, once I decide, I decide. And so I cannot waver in what I believe in. I cannot waver in how I do business. I cannot waver in the message that I'm sending, because at any time that I waver, then I become illegitimate, and that creates so much room for disrespect. And I cannot tolerate disrespect, because it took me too long to get to where I am. And I owe my parents way more than what I have given them thus far. My parents migrated, and they gave up everything so that I could have an opportunity, and I can't waver in any of that. So for me, when I don't say no, so there's this, I don't know how many of you have read Shonda Rhimes' book, but she has the luxury of saying no to a lot of things. Like, she just has it. She has the privilege and luxury of saying no. And she went on this journey to say yes, after, like, her peoples called her out, like, you always say no, you should say yes. And when I read this book, the first thing I thought of is, if I start saying no, I become invisible, right? So this is not the healthiest way to live. Again, I'm not saying to do this by any means. But when I think of saying no to an opportunity, I think of how invisible that makes people that sit in my seat. And that's not to say that I'm telling the best story. Someone else could have my spot. I'm very much so happy to share it. I'm very much so to say, hey, maybe such and such will be a better, might fit better than I'm very much so a pull up as I go kind of gal. But what I have learned in my journey in this career as an advocate is that if I say no, then we're not at the table, then we are invisible. So if it's not gonna be me, it's gotta be somebody. I don't care who it is, it don't have to be me ever. So that is what I use to guide me as I make decisions. I try to stay away from things that are performative, because they just don't feed my soul, and then they make me angry. And if you're gonna make me mad at me, then I can't, that's not a space that I can share. But in terms of mentor, every room that I enter, I look for a teammate. If I don't have a teammate in that room, I can't be in that room. It's just not safe for me. So I'm looking for teammates in every room that I enter. And my mom is actually who taught me that. My mom, she will make everybody work. It don't matter who you are. She gonna put you to work. She had our neighbors putting up lights before. Like, it's just who she is as a being. And so what I've learned, and not just her, my dad also works on a barter system. My dad never left he left the island, but he never left his island culture. So my dad very much so barters with everybody. And so I very much so operate under a collective. There is nothing that I do individually. So every room that I enter, I look for a mentor. And because I lead with love, most often than not, I'm met with love. And people have, I would say, flourished and cultivated me in my career and have helped me grow and have called me out when they were like, oh, nah, you stepping out of bounds. You gotta, listen, you need to redirect. And in college, I met this amazing woman who I felt like every time I went to her office, I was going into the lion's den because I left with more questions than answers. And all she says to me is, trust the process, baby. And I'm like, Miss P, what does that mean? What are you talking about, process? I don't get it. And so that has been my guiding light. And so I think that that's really what works for me. So find your people and make your team. I have a council of people who I go to when I'm making decisions. I struggle with money, Ashley. That's a problem for me. I need to be paid more, but I struggle with when people be like, what do you want to be paid? I don't know. I'm just a kid from the hood. When I hit a college campus, I didn't even know what I was doing. So I have a council of folks that I go to and I say, hey, this is what they're proposing to me. This is what they think I should do. What number do I give them? And they give me a number and then I run with it and I make those decisions that way. So I would say set up a council for yourself that, these are the folks that love you and safeguard you and protect your story and how you're going. And that's the way I've been able to be successful. And also just really, I try to stay as humble as possible because I know that I don't know everything. And I know that there is so much more room for growth. And through my humbleness is how I've been able to connect with so many people. It's really why I'm here today, right? Like I looked at Danielle and we met maybe 4 months ago. And I was like, oh, hi, you got babies? Can I see them? Like, how are they? And we have been able to grow together. And here I am.
So I'm gonna answer your question in reverse because you talked about what advice do you have for people who are going to set off in a similar direction, versus and how did you get where you are today? I know my colleagues down here, and Kelly, you especially know because you've worked on both sides. Federal government is a whole different beast to work for. It is as much a lifestyle as it is a career, in my opinion. So you have to be cognizant of that. There is a reputation, if you work in federal government, for bureaucracy. What's interesting is anyone that I talk with who works at a university like you folks is like, oh, you don't even understand bureaucracy compared to where we work. Like, it's way worse at a university. So I guess what I'm trying to get to is the advice for people who want to go in this direction, which is, we're very much the opposite of what HUD is saying. Like, we're almost never hiring at the Park Service. Just about everyone who calls me, because I get a lot of cold calls, particularly from college students, like, hey, I really would like to come work there. I'm really interested in accessibility, and I do this, and I do that, and the other thing. They're supremely disappointed when they find out that the job is not, oh, I just bop around to parks and, tell them how to make things accessible. It's like, I'm not saying I never go to parks, but 90% of the time I'm at a desk, at a computer, on Teams or Zoom or whatever it is. Like, that's, all the people who call me and, are basically like, well, I just like working outside. I was like, well, then this is not the job for you. You should go work at a park. You don't want to work in national policy, right? And so I think that where I'm trying to get to with that is saying that you really have to think about where you want your impact to be and what kind of impact you're seeking should determine the decisions you make. So for example, I started out as a special education teacher where I could, on a visceral day-to-day level, see whether or not the people I was working with were making progress and good things were happening, right? As I have progressed, you get further and further and further away from that to where you have a really hard time seeing, is what I'm doing make a difference? Because I am helping the people who help the people who help the people who help the people, somewhere down the chain. Or if you're a federal person who oversees grants, you give money to an organization, that organization does something, and hopefully there's an impact there, but it's this arm's length transaction. So I think that would be the biggest piece of advice that I would give anybody is you need to think about what your comfort zone is for where and how you want to be able to see the impact of what you're doing. It is a big piece of it. The other piece of advice that I give people, because the other thing is when people say to me, like, oh, well, like I want to be a manager, I want to be a this, that's another thing of like, why would you want to do that? Anyone who's ever been a manager is like, why would you aspire to that? Right? So that's the question I always ask, is like, well, why do you want to do that? So it's sort of looking at what is it that exactly that you want to do, and figuring out what is that space where you can actually do that thing to feel the impact that you want to feel. Because again, it becomes an arm's length transaction. It is no longer you are producing results. It is you are helping people who produce results, and your job is remove the barriers that prevent them from producing results. So the tie back to that is, in terms of how did I get here, I would be the first person to say, I could draw you a line from being in high school to where I am today. And that line is populated with a lot of points of right place, right time. But one could say, okay, well, there was a lot of luck involved, and absolutely there was. But one of the people who mentored me early in life when I was in high school often said, you create your own luck. So it is the confluence of right place, right time, but also you knowing it's the right place, right time, and seizing on that opportunity, be like, oh wait, there's an opportunity here. What do I do to leverage this opportunity?
Thank you. I see a theme in all of the conversations that you guys are having and talking about your own kind of trajectory and experiences in both being brave, right? You guys kind of all talked about taking brave steps and chances, whether it be a conversation or a funding mechanism or a challenge, and finding a place of trust, right? So, and I think those go hand in hand. To be able to be brave, you have to be in a space that you can trust, that will allow you to potentially make a mistake or potentially come up with an idea that needs to be changed or, massaged or developed more. So I think those are really important things. And I appreciate you guys, your willingness to be reflective with my question. So we have time for one more question. And I really would like you guys to think about kind of sharing with the audience if there was one thing that you hope that people in the audience take away today because of our conversation or because of the work that you're doing. It could be something concrete like a project or something about visioning of the future and something you're excited about. But if there's one thing that you hope that people take away from today, especially when we're thinking about equity and health and the whole person and how those intersect socially and culturally, what would it be?
I'm going to go first so I can cheat and say two.
Okay.
Because I've said one of them a lot already, and I'll do it fast, which is housing's really important. It's at the base of so much of what we do in our lives, and so pay attention to it. Be part of helping make it succeed, be part of helping it create opportunities for other people as well as yourself. But the other thing is I'll pick up a little bit on what Jeremy was talking about the bureaucracy. We love to demonize it, but don't be afraid of it. Bureaucracy, whether it's in government or in private enterprise or in the nonprofit sector, it's how we do big things. Because to do big things, we need a bunch of people working together. And it turns out, we need a lot of help organizing. We need rules, we need structure, and it doesn't have to be hierarchical, but it often is, at least in part. And that's where you need people to be managers, to help guide others, to help encourage others to do their best work, and to do it together. Because if we're all pulling in different directions, we won't get anything done. We have to move in one direction. So, in terms of the work we're doing right now, those of you who noticed the Inflation Reduction Act, it had a little bit of housing money, not very much. But that little bit of housing money that came to HUD, it's all in multifamily. We have $1 billion, which sounds like a lot, but actually isn't that much when you think about all the properties we're touching. To help those properties I talked about at the beginning, those housing that has rental assistance attached to it, that is for people with disabilities or older adults or family housing in often tougher neighborhoods, to help make it more energy efficient, safer in the face of the natural disasters that we know are coming more frequently and more severely, and healthier to live in. And it's fixing up old rental apartments, and we need to do that. Getting the chance to work on something like that means being part of the bureaucracy means taking some chances, and being willing to work on stuff that's going to take, like Kelly talked about, years to see the result. But when it does, the result's going to be big. So I'm excited by it. I hope you all are excited by it. And if you want to do more with housing, come check out HUD. We need all the help we can get.
Well, I'm going to go back to the same thing I said on the last question. That is, really, we're going to be doing a lot of projects, and there's going to be several in your local area. And really, the way to make sure that those get done correctly is you guys. Like, we need you on the ground, and this also is the perfect time to be identifying what needs to change, right? What needs to be redone, what needs to be rebuilt, or what needs to be built from the ground up. And identify those things, go to your local decision makers and get them to apply. And then make sure that the money's spent correctly and that stuff is built accessible. But really, we're really dependent on people in the local communities to make sure that that happens on the state level and then on the federal level. So we need people to really kind of help us make sure that this stuff happens correctly. And like I say, this is the time to identify what needs to be done and advocate for getting it funded too.
Thank you.
So yeah, I also want to go back to the first question and give a shout out to my wife who's right in front of me, who I felt like she's gonna kill me if I don't say it. You know, she's also been very, you know, integral to my growth and my emotional stability over the past couple of years. It's been, you know, a doozy, just to say the least. But if there's just one thing I could say, so I'm working on a project now with the AUCD Resource Center on, you know, trying to develop some metrics so that we can start measuring equity across the network. And, you know, I think it's, you know, I've had so many conversations over the past couple of days, and it's simple to say that we're gonna measure equity, but it's so complex to operationalize it, right? So I will say, you know, this work has to happen, and, you know, if you can't measure it, you can't see it, and if you can't see it, you can't change it. So let's try our best to, like, make a clear picture of what's going on so that we can, you know, better opportunities for all. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
I gave a lot of thoughts already. I would say be vulnerable. I think something that has really worked for me and has made me a better advocate is that I go into spaces knowing that sometimes I'm going to overpour, and that's not always okay, but I always operate under the guise of being vulnerable with the stories that I tell and how I put my message together. So I would say everyone, because it's not fair to only expect the advocates in the room to be the ones to be vulnerable. It's just inequitable within itself. And so if you can't be vulnerable with me, then why do I owe you anything? You know, so I would say be vulnerable across the board. And lastly, really, if I leave nothing with you, is that you need to create opportunity for folks with disabilities so that they can actually make real money and live fruitful lives. Because we're not here just to be a story. We're here to be so much more than that. And so it's a lot about money. It's a lot about how much, because everyone else is already telling us we're expendable, and if you're on my team and you're also telling me I'm expendable, that's a problem. So I need you to put your money where your mouth is and really create real clear lanes of opportunity for me to grow and flourish and be who I can be, and who you already envision me to be and are using me to be, but just ain't paying me what it's worth.
I'm gonna respond a little bit to what you said from HUD, which is, you're talking about the importance of the bureaucracy is, so I tend to say that the kind of role I have, I call an advocrat. Which is, I am leveraging the bureaucracy. I'm advocating by leveraging the bureaucracy, right? And we can't all be on the inside pulling levers. You also have to have people outside, you know, pushing, right? So I'm gonna lead with like, hey, what's the thing that you could do? And then I will tell you why I need you to do it to give context, but I will lead with it in case you zone out. What you could do is, and this is gonna be very selfish, You can go, and if you are the director, great. If you're not the director of your AUCD or your university center, you can go to them and you can say, hey, you know, there was this guy from the Park Service on this panel. And I think we should talk to that guy about how we can work together with the parks in our state. You can send me an email. You don't have to remember my name, how to spell it or anything. It's just accessibility@nps.gov. So you can send an email saying, our center would love to talk more with you about how we can support the parks in our state, because every single state has a national park in it. And the reason I say that is because I was talking about the decentralized nature of our system and how my job really is, you know, like the subject matter experts don't exist in the field. So they go, I don't, you know, there's an accessibility problem, what do I do? And then they call me and say, hey, you know, Jeremy, what do I do about this accessibility problem? And we have for many, many, many years had this model where we say, well, you know, we're subject matter experts in DC and here's what we think you should do. And I think that's the wrong model. I think the model should be, there are really smart people in your state who can do this just as well, if not better than I can. There is somewhere out there an independent living center in your state, there is some council, there is a university center on disability, there is the ADA National Network. There are all these people with disabilities with this subject matter expertise. I want my job to be, when that park calls me, to say, hey, I think I should match you up with these people in your state. An example I get is we get a lot of requests for, you know, hey, we really want to do a better job of serving people with autism in our park. What should we do? And I want to be able to say, you should contact your university center on disability, and I'll give you a person to talk to and find out from them what kind of training about autism they already deliver, right? So trying to turn the model into leveraging the resources that exist, and you are those resources, right? And you can also connect those parks with the disability community. What I would like to see as our agents of change is groups of people with disabilities showing up at our parks to talk with superintendents, to talk with interpreters, to talk with facilities people and say, you know, hey, we can help you sort through this barrier removal stuff. You don't need to call the guy from Washington. The only reason you call the guy from Washington is so that he can say, hey, go talk to those people. So I want to bring those local resources to bear, and I would love to have university centers and AT Act programs and ADA centers involved in that on the local level. The bonus is, you know, I understand that maybe going out to a park is not the easiest thing in the world, but generally if you're going out there to meet with staff, you're getting the opportunity to see the behind the scenes of the park, right? Which can often be pretty cool. And I would say that, you know, where we are moving with that model in the future is trying to do a way better job of providing information to the disability community about the opportunities that are available at the park, on what the barriers that we acknowledge exist are, so that we are mitigating expectations. Like that, I really want to shift us away from our deficit-based model, where what we look at is, well, what are all the places that we have problems, to talking about how do we do a better job of encouraging people with disabilities to visit by providing the knowledge and information that they need in order to make their own decisions about their visit. And then the more people with disabilities who visit, the more visible they become, the more our parks have to respond to that visitation. So anyway, there are ways for you to get involved in that conversation that I would love for you to take advantage of. Like I said, take it back to your center, talk about it, accessibility@nps.gov, say, hey, Jeremy, We would love to talk with you more about getting involved in supporting national parks and helping them do a better job of this, and we can make that happen.
Thanks, Jeremy. So one of the things that I'm taking away from the conversation today and want to share with the audience is the fact that we spent an hour and a half talking about health equity, and we haven't been talking about a medical model, metrics of how people in the community determine what a healthy body or mind to be. But we're talking about it and at a national elevated level with authentic choices and universal design and accessibility, where people have a choice to make healthy decisions around how they want to live and work and travel and love and engage and play. And to me, that's dynamic. And it gives me a hope for the possibility of how our field will continue to move forward and address and welcome the fact that health gets to be contributed to and determined by people. So I want to thank you guys all. I'm asked maybe we should give a round of applause to our panelists. And I want to thank everyone, Ethan, Kelly, Ashley, JD, and Jeremy, for taking the time to be here today, to sharing your wisdom and your ideas and being open. I also want to thank everyone for attending this morning and remind you that there's a full day ahead of poster symposia, concurrent sessions, special interest group meetings, and more. And we hope to see you all at the award ceremony this evening at 5:30, where we recognize people, programs, and organizations for their leadership and contributions to improve the lives of people with disabilities and their families. So thank you again. Thank you for coming. Thank you for participating. Thank you. Nice to meet you.